I now convene the March 12, 2013 regularly scheduled meeting of the Westchester Board of Trustees. Mr. Jones, please call the roll.
Mr. Wong?
Present.
Mrs. Stoker?
Here.
Mr. Lang?
Present.
Please arise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Okay. First block, we have citizens' comment. You're given 2 minutes to address to the trustees. First person signed up is Steve Rynell. Please come forward. State your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, my name is Stephen Rynell, 8108 Long Meadow Drive, Westchester, Ohio. Good evening. I'm here to talk about the code that applies to the Liberty Tax Service issue. Again, just the code. The way I understand it, no one is allowed to stand in the right-of-way and promote their cause. This includes no business, nonprofit fundraising, or anyone running for public office. Who enforces this code? If the police, zoning, or a trustee sees children, a church group, or a Girl Scout troop waving a sign saying lemonade 25 cents, free car wash, or cookies for sale, are they supposed to pull over and tell them to stop? This does not sound like good police community relations. Mr. Wong, you seem like you are a strong proponent of this code, but I personally saw you twice standing at the corner of Cox and Tylersville waving before your last run for trustee. Others I talked to said they saw you in other parts of the township doing the same thing. But this I can't confirm, so it is just hearsay. Are the three of you telling me if you see, are you driving in, are the three of you telling me that if you see someone selling lemonade in your own subdivision, you will pull over and stop them from doing it? Again, I am here just seeking clarification of the code itself, who it applies to, and when and who enforces it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Rynell.
Thank you.
We have Mr. Carl Ruman.
Good evening. My name is Carl Ruhlman, 8285 Ventle Drive, beautiful uptown Westchester. I suppose there are some people who believe that Democrats and Republicans should always go out of their way to cooperate with each other, that differences of opinion can always be worked out with negotiation and compromise. They often forget that while compromise on method can be beneficial, compromise of principle is to be spurned. To such people, it might even be thought that crossing the aisle is the most noble of political activity. Here this evening, I wish to bring attention to and applaud probably the greatest crossing of the aisle since that of Arlen Specter. At the last meeting of the trustees, with Trustee Stoker absent, 2 registered Republicans, Trustee President Wong and Trustee Lang, could have, by voting together, passed any number of agenda items to their liking. But Trustee Wong, to his inestimable and indeterminate credit, chose to defer the voting on certain issues of indefinite controversy until his compatriot, Mrs. Stoker, was in attendance. In addition, apparently seeking to make his crossing of the aisle more definitive and more public, and without any apparent provocation, made a verbal attack on Trustee Lang over an issue long ago resolved in Mr. Lang's favor. Trustee Wong, if you are so inclined to cross the aisle, repeatedly vote in deference to Mrs. Stoker, and oppose a true conservative public servant, I would suggest that you make it official and register as a Democrat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ruman. We have Mr. Steve Clark, sign up. You have 2 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Clark. I live at 7392 St. Ives Place here in Westchester. I would like to comment on last week's trustees meeting, especially about Mr. Wong's behavior. At the last trustee meeting, Mr. Wong, you chose to bring up Mr. Lang's past problems. I would remind you that although formally accused, which is essentially what indicted means, Mr. Lang was not charged with any crime. I thought at this point should be clarified since you chose to use the word indicted so frequently last or 2 weeks ago. As you continued, sir, you also made statements that Mr. Lang had received illegal money, something for which Mr. Lang was not even indicted. My observation of the last trustees meeting was that at the beginning of his comments, Mr. Lang was polite and primarily interested in managing township affairs, especially with regard to unapproved expenditures over $2,500. You had no constructive comments, but seemed to relish the opportunity to make personal attacks on Mr. Lang. Your behavior was quite frankly an embarrassment. To quote you, Mr. Wong, I wonder if you are capable of doing the job. I wonder if the obvious animosity you have towards Mr. Lang doesn't cloud your judgment. Is Mrs. Stoker always right and Mr. Lang always wrong? Furthermore, I wonder if township affairs haven't suffered because of your inability to get along with Mr. Lang, and now you can't get along with Mr. Jones either. Mr. Wong, I believe that your attitude towards Mr. Lang and Mr. Jones contributes significantly to a dysfunctional administration of this township. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Bruce Jones.
I'm Bruce Jones, and I live at 5685 McCarthy Court. Proud and honored to be your fiscal officer. In a moment, we're going to be discussing the January 22nd and February 12th minutes on the agenda, and because you won't permit me to speak during discussion about my minutes, we have this disjointed conversation about the minutes, and that's the position you put me in and everyone else, unfortunately. I noted you were unhappy, Mr. Wong, about the minutes, given your email dated February 27th, wherein you said, quote, I did not ask you to change the original January 22nd meeting minutes. The contents of that minutes was clear and acceptable to me. You initiated the change because you did not like it now. This is an example of your editorialization, unquote. However, my email dated 6 days earlier actually explained why I made the change, and it was that you, Mr. Wong, apparently needed clarification about the discussion about my participation in the discussion about my minutes. As a result, that portion of the January 22nd minutes have been clarified in detail. The minutes are now a word-for-word account of exactly who said what, but you don't like that. And yeah, Lee, you flip-flopped. And most of us would attribute it to you, once again deferring to Catherine, because subsequently apparently she told you to change your vote. But if you want to approve my original 122 minutes, that's fine. You said this is an example of your editorialization. A verbatim transcript of what everyone said is not editorializing. I must question if you understand what editorializing even means. But in fairness to you and me and everyone, why don't you provide one example, just one, of me editorializing anywhere in any of my minutes since I took office? We'll all look forward to your examples at the next meeting. Lastly, you remarked at that last meeting that we've had so many problems since you became fiscal officer. Lee, you're using that we awfully freely because you're just talking about you and Catherine. I report to them. I work for them. And interesting is that during the election when I campaigned for fiscal officer, George endorsed no one for fiscal officer. However, both you, Lee, and Catherine endorsed two separate opponents of mine. And I think that's very significant in accounting for much of your behavior that's been adversarial toward me and my work performance. Oh, and in the interest of transparency, here's a copy of the January 22nd minutes for our residents as it pertains to that discussion, word for word. I want people to know exactly what we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Okay, we have no presentation. We move to action items. Item A, entertain a motion for approval approve trustee meeting minutes, January 22nd, 2013.
I'd like to move that we approve those meeting minutes with all the corrections presented by everybody, including the ones that I made about a month ago that so far haven't been included. I made copies for everybody. And just as an aside, Mr. Jones, we still have that spelling error on the last page I raised before, if you want to. These are the same minutes I submitted.
I've seen
Originals.
Kathy's
Remember
minutes. I
those?
had no concern with them.
I haven't changed them since I submitted them.
So we'll ask Mr. Wong to build these into the current minutes as presented tonight.
Do we have a
I'll
second?
Yeah, my motion was to approve them as, with all the
With
corrections everybody submitted,
Corrections. I'll second that.
Okay.
and including the spelling thing on the last page.
Clarification, just so you can advise me.
Sure.
Is it to be at the exclusion of the word-for-word?
No, I interpret that as the inclusion of everybody's corrections, including,
Yeah, I said everybody, I really meant everybody.
Okay, very good.
I believe it.
Discussion? Any other discussion? Okay. Roll call?
Mr. Wong,
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker,
Yes?
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
Okay. Item B, entertain a motion to approve trustee meeting minutes, February 12, 2013.
Also move?
I'll second it.
Discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Wong,
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker,
Yes?
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
Okay, we have no documentation for the 26th. I will entertain a motion to approve payment of bills.
Also move?
I'll second it.
Discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Wong,
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker,
Yes?
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
Mrs. Boyko, item D, requisitions greater than $2,500.
There are several. Item 1 is for administration and obviously all the various departments, $39,735.01 to X10 Technologies. This is to purchase upgrade for our SAN system, which is the storage area network. In addition to recommending this expenditure, I wanted the board to be aware that we will continue to monitor other technologies to address data storage. Item 2, $23,773.62 to the Butler County Emergency Management Agency. This is to remit annual fee for operational services. Item 3, administration, $10,000 to the Westchester Liberty Chamber Alliance to renew sustaining gold level membership program. Item 4, $3,840 to EC Link. This is to renew hosting, off-site hosting and annual maintenance of the Township's website. Item 5, $3,825 to the Center for Local Government. This is to renew the membership for 2013. Item 6, $6,530.76 to Rush Trucking Centers. This is to repair a brake system on Medic Unit 6091, which is a 2009 Horton International. This is to increase an existing purchase order that was previously, I believe, opened under the limit. Once they once they being Rush Trucking Centers service the facility of the vehicles, they found additional improvements or repairs that were necessary. Item 7, fire, $6,197.52 to Preferred Communications Incorporated. This is to replace 12 AVLs, GPS receivers on various fire and EMS apparatus. These receivers allow the communications dispatch to actually dispatch the most in the best proximity, the closest proximity to the event or the emergency 911 call that is occurring. So this is a GPS type system. Item 8, fire, $5,642 to Clark Power Services Incorporated. This is to repair radiator and fan blades on vehicle 224, a 1994 Pierce engine. And item 9, services, $5,267.42 to the Butler County Engineers Office. And this is to remit payment for our 2012 repair costs to the decorative mast arm traffic signals per an agreement that we do have with the Butler County Engineers Office.
Thank you. I will entertain a motion for item 1 through 9.
I'll make the motion. We approve items 1 through 9.
I'll second.
Discussion? Mr. Jones, roll call.
Mr. Wong,
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
We have no personnel item. Mrs. Boyko, item 10.
I have a request to use township property, namely the Voice of America grounds in front of the facility, the museum facility. This is a motion to approve a license agreement between Westchester Township and the Rotary Club of Westchester Liberty for the use of portion of 8070 Tylersville Road of this township property for the production and presentation of the Voice of America Barbecue Bash, and authorize the township administrator to execute the agreement. The event is scheduled for Thursday, May 16th through Saturday, May 18th, so it's a multi-day event, and as I said, it's sponsored by the Westchester Liberty Rotary, and they have a new accolade this year on this event, so it keeps growing each year, which kudos to them. And it is, I believe they have been identified as the Buckeye State Barbecue Championship.
Okay, thank you. I will entertain a motion for item 10.
I'll move that we approve item 10.
Also move.
Discussion?
I think it's worthwhile to also mention that they're doing this in order to raise funds for charitable endeavors in our local area.
And for those of you that attended last year, the barbecue is good and there's a lot of fun to be had.
Mr. Jones, roll call.
Mr. Wong,
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker,
Yes.
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
Item 11.
Item 11, pleased to bring this to the Board of Trustees for your consideration. You may recall at your December 4th, 2012 trustee meeting, you approved a lease agreement between the Westchester Township Board of Trustees and the National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting, contingent upon and subject to the National Park Service's approval of that lease agreement. Since that time, staff has been interacting and exchanging with the National Park Service to seek their approval and acceptance of the lease agreement, and several factors were identified in needs of amendments based on our current relationship and governance of the Voice of America Museum with the National Park Service. One of the items that the National Park Service was requesting was an amendment to the the program for preservation and utilization, which basically identifies the approved uses for the facility and how it may be utilized and used for community endeavors. So the program for preservation and utilization was presented to the National Park Service in an amendment form, seeking their endorsement and approval prior to acceptance by the Board of Trustees. They have approved the proposed amendments that staff has presented, and we have receipt of those approval. So it just requires the board's action to motion to approve statutory resolution number 03/2003, approving an amended program of preservation and utilization (PPU) for the development, management, programming, use, operation, and maintenance of the Voice of America Bethany Relay Station and applicable grounds. To very succinctly itemize what those amendments entail. Basically, adoption of the concept master plan and business and operating plan that the National Voice of America Museum had finalized with their consultant, and which this Board of Trustees had previously adopted. So that is now made part of the governance of the Voice of America and the museum, and will be its guiding principle on how that facility can be used and how it can be improved, altered, or modified.
Okay. I will entertain a motion for item 11.
Also move.
I'll second it.
Discussion?
I think it's worth drawing attention to the fact that all the land which the federal government turned over to Metro Parks, to Westchester, the Miami University Learning Center, all of this was given to us being Metro Parks, Westchester Township, Miami, and the only thing they really asked in return was, would we please make every effort to maintain the Voice of America facility because of its importance. So this is an important step in doing that, and kudos to all the volunteers that have worked so hard with the Voice of America to perform this service, I think, to everybody.
I would agree with that, and I know this has been something you've had particular interest in, Ms. Stoker. Thanks for your leadership on this over the years.
Roll call.
Mr. Wong,
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Item 12.
Item 12, related to item 11, but requiring subsequent and separate approval by the Board of Trustees, is statutory resolution number 04-2003. As I mentioned, the board approved a lease agreement with the National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting on December 4th of 2012 at your regularly scheduled meeting at that time. And since that time, we've been working with the National Park Service. The revised lease agreement that I'm presenting this evening represents non-substantive changes. However, because the program for preservation and utilization document needed to be amended, I thought it was appropriate for the board to also take action to amend the lease agreement as well. The non-substantive changes in the lease agreement, it just are more strongly asserts the National Park Service's intentions and desire to receive and accept any modifications or alterations to grant approval prior to those modifications or alterations being made to the facility. So language, and there is a track change for your review in your packets. So those track changes really just reflect the National Park Service assertions of wanting that review and approval prior to any modification or improvement being constructed. The facility, as I mentioned previously, and use will be governed by the lease agreement, which is consistent with the PPU and the concept master plan and the business and operating plan that the National Voice of America Museum had previously contracted and adopted. The general terms of the lease remain the same. It is an initial 5-year term with automatic 5-year renewals with a 365-day notice by either party if they would like to terminate, not for cause. The museum board shall be responsible for the development, management, programming, use, operations, and maintenance of the museum facility and applicable grounds. And the township will endeavor to provide a descending financial contribution during the initial term of the lease. As the board is aware, during your 2013 operational budget work session, we did discuss your intentions to provide a descending financial contribution to the National Voice of America Museum Board during their initial term, so for the first 5 years. Obviously, budget and financial constraints not limited. And so with that, I will be bringing for the board's consideration at your next meeting your first potential contribution that you had proposed to the museum board of $85,000. And from there, subsequent years will be reduced at $75,000 and for the next 2 years and $50,000 for years 3, 4, and 5. Again, budgetary constraints not limited. So requesting the board's consideration to approve statutory resolution number 04-2013, approving a revised lease agreement between the Westchester Township Board of Trustees and the Board of the National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting for the development, management, programming, use, operation, and maintenance of the Voice of America Bethany Relay Station and applicable grounds.
Okay. I will entertain a motion for item 12.
Also move.
I'll second.
Discussion?
Again, I think this is an important step in making sure that the Voice of America can attain independence. And kudos, I think we have several members of the board here. I think you've worked on the VOA board. Yes. Mr. Chris Wannenberg has. A lot of people put a lot of effort into it. Yeah. And it's, I think the intentions of the board that this will enable the VOA to stand on its own as we get it going. They get the personnel they need and start their own fundraising.
If you look at it like a business, we're supplying some seed money and some opportunity, and it's very important that we do this and this organization becomes self-sustaining. Otherwise, it's going to end up being a long-term taxable drain on the citizens of Westchester. And I believe this organization can stand on its own. I believe it's that special of a place, and the people on the board are that committed to making sure that this place is successful.
And the Voice of America is our national treasure.
Yes, it is.
I would agree.
So, Mr. Jones, roll call.
Mr. Wong?
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Item 13, Mrs. Parker.
Item 13, this is a motion not to object to new liquor permit for Asian Treasure Restaurant Incorporated, doing business as Taiyou Asian Diner, 8179 Princeton Glendale Road, Suite K. It is in the information that was provided by the police department, it's indicated that the owner was advised that he's been open for business. It says June of this year, but it's June of 2012. I do know that for a fact. It's June of 2012. And he would like to seek a liquor permit for his operations.
Okay. I will entertain a motion for item 13.
Also move.
I'll second.
Not to object. Discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Wong,
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker,
Yes.
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
Item 14, Ms. Morgan.
Item 14, motion not to object to a new liquor permit for Bella Vino Merchants, LLC, doing business as Bella Vino Merchants, 6064 Westchester Road. The establishment currently has a D1 and a D2 permit. The proprietors is requesting to add a D3 permit, which will allow spirituous liquors.
I move that we not object to a new liquor permit for Asian Treasure Restaurant.
I'll second the motion that we not object.
Asian treasure? This would be the...
Doing
Bella
business
Vino.
as,
Bella
excuse
Vino.
me, Bella Vino Merchants. I misread that line, thank you. I'd like to amend my motion to not object to a liquor permit for Bella Vino Merchants, doing business as Bella Vino Merchants.
I'll amend my second.
Any second? Discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Wong,
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker,
Yes.
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
Item 15.
This meeting is, of all things, National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting. The last item for the board's consideration as a regular business item is to grant a permanent access and construction water main easement to the Butler County Commissioners for the need to improve and install a water main extension project along the western property line of the Voice of America property. The primary need for this improvement and this extension is to provide proper water suppression to the facility as the National Voice of America Museum Board invests in the internal infrastructure of the building and starts to develop it as its national treasure of the museum. We want to ensure that there is proper fire suppression services to protect that investment. And so this water main easement allows us to do that. We have received subsequent approval from the Ohio Cultural Facilities Commission that as portion of the grant that remains, we are able to utilize these funds for that main extension, and the township then can seek reimbursement for those costs. So the County Commissioners is requesting the board's consideration to grant the permanent access and construction water main easement on the dimensions of the property, as I stated. And then also authorizing, if you grant me the authority, to sign any and all documents in order to effectuate the easement.
Okay. I will entertain a motion for item 15.
I'll move that we approve item 15.
I'll second.
Discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Wong,
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker,
Yes.
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
Okay. Discussion items and trustee comments.
We have citizens' comments first.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed. Or should it? Next, we have citizens' comment.
I'm Mark Morris. I live at 8876 Eagle View Drive. I came this evening to speak about the last meeting. First thing I want to talk about is I thought it was a great idea that Mr. Lang brought up about having a citizens forum group or having a citizens forum meeting when the zoning on zoning issues that sometimes become legal issues, such as this liberty tax thing. I think it would be a great idea to involve the citizens in something like that to get their input before the trustees move forward with, in my opinion, with lawsuits that really don't make common sense when we spend money on something when, you know, the other gentleman that spoke, on a daily basis you can drive through the township and you can see people holding up signs, advertising their business. You can see them in costumes, everything, and it's like we pick and choose the business that we allow to do that, and other businesses we don't allow them to do that. There was a comment at one time by a trustee that was made about Westchester becoming a shanty town because of this person wearing a costume. Well, I would like an explanation why that would make the township a shanty town, but yet you can drive up Tylersville exit off of the expressway, and there must be 25 or 30 signs advertising everything from the Jack in the Box restaurant to, there's even a couple of political signs that are still there from last November. So it just seems to me like we have no direction as to how we treat businesses in Westchester. It's like we pick and choose, the business that we want to stay and the businesses that we don't want to stay. So that the idea that he came up with was a great idea that I thought that the township should really consider doing. The other thing is I just don't understand when I sit and watch the videos of these meetings why it is so necessary to go into this petty backstabbing and singling out a particular trustee over something that happened in the past that he was cleared for. I mean, Mr. Lang, I'm sure, went through a lot of heartache over that, and he was finally cleared for it. It's in the past, and that's where it should remain. And for everybody to gang up on someone over that issue. And the same thing with Bruce. I sit on 2 homeowners boards, and we take minutes every single meeting. And every single meeting, when I watch it on the video, we're always talking about the minutes that go on in this meeting. I guess to me, the simple solution is, if you don't want it to wind up in the minutes, don't say it. Because the way I understand, meeting minutes are basically a legal thing that you have to do to make the meeting official. And the only thing that you can change in meeting minutes is either a clarification of a statement that was said or change a misspelled word. But this always talking about adding things, deleting things, when we're in the next meeting, I just don't see how that's possible. Because I've sat on my boards for 5 years, and we never have this kind of action at the next meeting about the previous meeting and who said this and who said that and why I want to delete this and why I want to add this. And it just gives a bad impression of the whole trustee board when it seems like at meetings everybody's disagreeing. Because I realize everybody has their own opinion, but the township looks for you, trustees, to lead the township. And if the trustees can't even get along in a meeting, then how does the rest of the public even expect to be getting along? So that's all I have to say on that. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Do we have anyone else?
Yeah, my name is Eric Dietrich, 5847 Wood Thrush Lane here in Westchester. And the reason I'm here today is to follow up on a series of emails that I sent to the township regarding their activities at Jefferson Cemetery, to which I have still not received any documentation or township standpoint for what their access to private property rights is. On February 27th, 28th, and on March 1st, the township sent a crew of workers out to work on Jefferson Cemetery, which is only accessible through private property. There was no notification given to the property owners. Property damage was done to private property. The so-called maintenance has basically created, an eyesore as well as a public hazard. It's left stumps and logs behind. When I went out and talked to one of the employees, I'm staying home myself on a Friday from work. I was told by that employee that he was there at the request of the Historical Society. When I talked to the neighbor the day before, she mentioned no notice of or awareness of the township coming out to do the work. They were also told that the township was out there at the request of the Historical Society. When I mentioned, who brought or who invited the township onto the property, I was told that it was the neighbors at Lot 19 who have explicitly denied that. And I have that in email and in writing. If you look at the Westchester Historical Society page, Jefferson Cemetery, anything there is not any part of their interest. So I don't know if they have any interest or ownership of the property there. If you look at the documents on file with Butler County, plat number 2335, there is no easement, there is no allowance for the township to come onto our property or access that lot or area. And again, no notification was given, and when the township was asked why they were there, and then subsequently asked to leave, they simply came back and continued to work on private property. No certificate of insurance was provided. no liability or waiver of liability was provided. Work was being done on our private road, which we snowplow, which we maintain, which we have 100% fiscal responsibility for. City did not step up or try to offer any compensation or, waiver of liability or anything for that. And I'd really like to know, why does the township have, right to come in and access our property?
Thank you. We could address that when we get to the trustee meetings. You haven't been here before. This is a time for citizens like yourself to come forward, and then I know I would like to respond to it, and I'm sure Mrs. Boyko would too, when we get to our portion of the comment.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Dietrich. Is there anyone else? Okay. Let's move on to discussion items and trustee comments. Mrs. Boyko?
Go over the scheduled ones and then address some of the citizens' comments, or how would the board like to proceed?
Go over the business first.
Okay. The item that I have for the board's consideration this evening is actually no consideration, just wanted to present to the Board of Trustees a potential funding source and option of the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments and its sponsorship of the Transportation Alternative Project Program. As the board is aware, it established a Connections Committee, and after receiving recommendations from that Connections Committee, it adopted the Westchester Connections Plan in August of 2009. The purpose of the committee and the plan were to assess pedestrian and bicycle access to amenities, thereby connecting key routes and identifying key routes to connect people and places. Since that time, the township has and private developments have initiated connections through the community. A project that's been previously discussed, not to any great extent or any length, but what has been presented and is identified as a connection and as a capital improvement project for 2013 and previous years, is the Smith Road Connector. The Smith Road Connector linking 3 multifamily developments on the south side of Beckett and Smith Roads, basically adjacent to the west, Beckett Park West, and across from the entrance of the Beckett Ridge subdivision and the Smith-Beckett Road intersection. These three multifamily developments on the south side of these roadways, connecting them by crossing at the traffic light at Beckett and Smith Road to an extended multi-use path from Beckett Ridge Boulevard along Smith Road to just west of 747. So the scope of the capital improvement that's been presented as part of the 2013 operational budget for the board's consideration, not necessarily action, is linking these 3 multifamily developments on the opposite side of the road, making a connection to cross the road, and then extending a path that could currently be extended from the Beckett Ridge Boulevard path along Smith Road to just west of 747. So across 747 to the McDonald's Sipsey Climb, where there's another existing pathway. This connection would provide a multimodal choice for nearly 5,000 households. Now that I use the term multimodal choice because someone who is over at Saratoga Farm may not wish to choose to ride a bike or to walk to the Kroger, but it is an option that potentially would be a choice for that household. Currently, employees of the retail services that live in the multifamily developments, again, this would provide a multimodal choice for them to access their employment. These same areas will also be connected to the central business district going in the east direction. Although no formal design or cost projections have recently been calculated, several years ago, the Butler County Engineer's Office estimated project costs around $250,000, proposing the connections of a 10-foot wide multi-purpose path, a 5-foot wide sidewalk, or a combination of the two, constructed of either concrete or asphalt. This was a very, very preliminary cost. It was something that the board had, again, this project's been on the capital improvement plan for the last several years. It's something that from time to time this project does come before this board, and you do discuss it at your meetings. In order for me to be prepared, I just went ahead and asked the engineer's office what kind of costs are we talking about. And again, that has not been presented to you formally because you've never endorsed the project and you never proceeded with the project. The Township's 2013 capital improvement plan identifies tax increment financing as an eligible source of funding and estimates the project costs around $300,000. That's part of your CIP as a TIF potential eligible funding source. Staff has not actively been seeking alternative funding sources or grants for any of these connections plans. However, a potential source has been identified through the Transportation Alternative Program, which is a federal grant program administered through the OKI, Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments. The TAP, Transportation Alternative Program, replaces the previously similar funding source of Transportation Enhancement Funds, which was funded by the federal government for bicycle and pedestrian facilities, traffic calming, and environmentals related to road project. I am presenting this to the board for your consideration because the application deadline is April 12th, so it would require some action by the Board of Trustees at your next meeting. The award date for any project would be June of 2013. The maximum award of the grant would be $500,000 with a minimum requirement of a 20% local match. However, increased local matches do warrant higher points on the metric point system of evaluation. All of the identified scope of this project would be an eligible application for the TAP program. And just basically, I'm not seeking the board's action this evening, but just trying to get a sense from the board. Is this something that you wish to pursue? And if it is, staff would have to work over the next 2 weeks to prepare the application. Even if you submit the application, it does not require you to accept the grant. So if there's any concerns about wanting to gather further information before you actually encumber yourselves and any township financial money to the program or to the grant, you'd have that opportunity. We would have that opportunity to do that. So again, staff is not soliciting nor suggesting nor recommending that we file for this grant. Just want to get the board's flavor that if you wish to pursue this project this year, this would be a potential revenue source to help offset some of the cost.
Mr. Lane?
Yeah, Judy, even though we have to apply by April, the grant won't be, did I hear that right, June of 2013?
Yes.
Not June of this year, June of next year.
This is 2013.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, it is June of this year.
Yes.
My bad. Thank you for clarifying that. That spring forward stuff has me all messed up. My opinion on this, this is part of the Agenda 21 program that I am just fundamentally against. For us to increase our bike paths and our walking paths, that's not a core competency of township government. And even though it's administered by the OKI, the money is going to be in the form of a federal grant. And the federal government currently borrows about 40 cents for every dollar that they spend. So not only is this not a core competency, not only does it add to Agenda 21, but if we do this, we're only passing the cost and the obligation for this onto our children and our grandchildren by taking the federal government's money. The grant will only cover construction, which over the life of the asset is a very small portion of the total cost, and the rest of the cost will likely be borne by the general fund of Westchester. And our police levy is going to be upside down in a few short years. It's projected that we're going to go back to the voters in 2016, potentially with another levy. And the general fund, if the police levy doesn't get passed, may actually be asked to help support the police department. And to me, policemen and policewomen are much more important to me than our township having more bike paths. According to the Cincinnati Enquirer in a recent article that they ran, Westchester already has the highest amount of bike paths in the Cincinnati area. So to me, it's not a core competency, even with an 80% match for only a small portion of the total cost of the asset. It's not worth it for us to encumber our citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Lane.
Yes. As far as this adding to the national debt, whether or not we receive part of that money to build a sidewalk, it's going to be spent in some community, number one. Number two, helping incentivize and encourage our local business is one of our essential services or core competencies, as you like to call them. What this path does, and let me add my own personal caveat, I would not approve it unless the property owners on which the sidewalk or hiking bike path, whatever we're going to term it, did approve it, are doing that. This would help generate business, I think, for all the businesses down towards Willie's, the Kroger's, even across the street, because there's protected crosswalks going across 747 to Izzy's and all the businesses across the way. It allows people from, were you saying about 4,000 homes, Mrs. Boyko, to either flow towards the 747 commercial district or to flow over even to the library, to Union Center Boulevard, providing access to many of our businesses without having to necessarily get in the car, have to spend more on gas. It allows them to take perhaps helpful exercise, perhaps families biking together to go to the parks, to go to, and this path would help them do that. It connects hundreds of condominiums down off of Smith Road, as well as the single-family homes. I see nothing but a benefit to our businesses, both on the 747 strip and over at the Union Center Boulevard. I think it would enhance our businesses, enhance our community, and enhance our way of life. I don't see it as adding to our national debt. I don't think it would be a drag on our own township finances at all. I think it would instead incentivize commerce, which is good for us.
Yeah, let me address a few points. Every dollar that we take from the federal government is going to add to the national debt. Now, your argument may be it's minuscule compared to the overall national debt, but every dollar we take from the federal government will add to the national debt because they're currently borrowing about 40 cents for every dollar that they spend. I do not see helping to incentivize business as a core competency. I think the best thing we can do for business is to keep our cost of government low, not add frivolous expenditures that we're going to have to upkeep in the future that is going to impact the property taxes that we are going to ultimately have to look at charging. Best thing we can do for businesses, keep the cost of government low and allow them to maximize their profits. That's why I think Westchester has flourished and developed. Not because we're better, smarter, quicker, faster than any other community, but from an economic development perspective, a business can just come here and make more money. So I am against this. I think this is a part of the Agenda 21 program, and I do not support it.
If I could offer one comment back to that, I find your comments kind of surprising. It sounds to me like if you had been sitting on the board with myself back when we approved the construction of the Union Center Boulevard interchange, you would have voted no because it wasn't a core competency for us to encourage business.
No.
I thought it was a brilliant idea.
Competency. I would have voted yes because it's infrastructure. Infrastructure is a core competency.
Well, infrastructure is not just roads. It's also water and sewer and electricity and sidewalks and bike paths. All of that is part. It's garbage collection. All of this is part of a network of infrastructure which every community needs. Now, we aren't responsible for every bit of it.
That's right.
But we are responsible for those things which come within our purview, for example, roads. And I see sidewalks and bike paths in this particular case, not in every, but in this particular case, as enhancing transportation and enhancing our small business vitality.
I just don't see someone leaving Cherry Lane Farm, driving up to the 747 Kroger on their bike, where, and I'm using my memory right now, so this may not be accurate, I don't think there's one bike rail on either side of 747 going up and down to all those businesses. That's an opinion, not an assertion. It's possible I'm incorrect, but they're not going to go in there, buy their groceries on their bike, and drive all the way back to Cherry Hill Farm, or whatever the name of that subdivision is, the one Ms. Boyko referenced. So I think for us to say we're expanding it for all those miles is an exaggeration on our part. I think there's very few people that will have significant use out of this. And long term, to me, Policemen and firemen are more important than bike paths. And just to be clear, I define our core competencies. We all may have a different definition. I define them as infrastructure to include roads, stormwater management, not the other things you define. The private sector provides for those, and police and fire. To me, that is our core competency. And, of course, emergency services, the EMT as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lane and Mr. Stoker, for the good discussion. I want to say that this connections path is vital to the area, from Beckett Ridge all the way to Kroger and to the other side of 747, which is another a few thousand residents over there. You got to cross that road, 747 to McDonald's, and all the way to, is it Endeavor? Still
Yes.
over there. We have discussed this many times before, and now there's a grant on this OKI, which is 80-20. They pay 80% and we pay 20%. Grant is good, that it will cost us less money to build. There's a bike path, a walking path. There are a lot of people using it. I've seen it out there. And there's less pollution and enhance the quality of life. There are families out there walking with the dogs, running, exercising, walking. Every day I see them out there. And with the gas prices looming around $4 a gallon, I think we Americans need to learn to use other means of transportation or traveling instead of keep driving our fossil fuel vehicles just to go across the street. I think this is good for the community. That I've seen many people have been out there walking and using it. So I am for it.
I'll just counter a few points. The 80% to build it is a very small portion of the cost over the life of the asset, which I've already stated. For government to want to impose lifestyle changes on Americans, saying we're going to force you not to consume so much gas, to me is very objectionable. That's a choice an individual should make, not government. And to me, this is just part of the Agenda 21 program, and I just can't support it. Having said that, I can count to two, and I don't think there's much need for any more debate. I think you've got the feel of the board, Ms. Boyko.
Could I ask a couple of things? Number one, that if we do go forward, that number one, we ascertain whether or not the entities who own the land on which, if it's not being done in the right-of-way, is it all in the right-of-way, or is some of it on private property?
We have engaged in no design, no construction drawings. I could not answer that question right now.
Personally,
But
just speaking as one trustee, I would expect us to have the approval of the majority of landowners if it does mean we're on private property.
Oh, certainly, they would have to grant some form of an easement, yeah.
And would they also be maintaining the sidewalk, or would the township be maintaining it?
Again, there's been no formal design or layout. And,
that would be something we'd probably want to know.
yeah, oh, certainly, certainly. And I think looking at, I can bring for the next meeting as well, then just to answer some of the questions. And I think Trustee Lane's points are very well taken in terms of the long-term maintenance costs. I could bring to you the maintenance costs of what we have currently for the Port Union Bike Trail, the trail along the hillside at Beckett as it approaches the barn. Those are two like systems that we envision that would be potential facilities that could be constructed in this scope. And we could certainly bring to you what those costs have been. Repaving of an asphalt path is probably every 12 to 15 years. With minor improvements along the way in terms of crack sealing and things like that, depending on the stabilization of it. So we certainly can bring those values to it, so that you're making a very educated decision in terms of those long-term maintenance funding costs.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Boyko, you want to address?
Mr. Dietrich's?
Yeah.
With the board's pleasure.
That's fine with me. Yeah, I know we're all concerned I've been one, and I'm sure all my fellow trustees have been watching this whole exchange of emails. The township is required to maintain cemeteries which are given to it or which we discover have been abandoned. You have a particular situation where there's no access to it. And this is one of the things, nobody wants to cause distress to any of our property owners. And I'm sure that there is some way that we can work out a situation which will be a win-win for everybody. Certainly the people buried there and their families have a right to know that, I believe, that their loved ones are being cared for. On the other hand, we certainly don't want to cause distress and damage to private homeowners' property. I think it's very important that we sit down, you with Mrs. Boyko, our Township Administrator, and see if we can't work out a situation, you and your neighbors, which would be to everybody's benefit, and so we could perform our responsibilities. I've asked Mrs. Boyko to ascertain, and I think we're waiting on our law director to see if we have any legal right to just abandon that property. I don't think it would be ethically right, but if we have no legal way to get to it, we can't very well paratroop in bush hoggers to care for the property. I do persist in believing, as an optimist, that we could work out something. But it does mean that we have to meet. And I know to date, there apparently you and Mrs. Boyko have been unable to sit down. I would hope that in the near future that would be possible. Because there's got to be some way that we can all reach an agreement where the citizens that have passed and are residing in that cemetery can have the ground cared for, while at the same time respecting the needs and the rights that the property owners that surround that cemetery have. So, Mrs. Boyko, if you...
I'd like to add something before Mrs. Boyko does. I've actually been out and I've met with Mr. Dietrich and I've looked at the property. And I think that one of the bigger concerns and the fundamental problem is that when we were first approached by Mr. Dietrich and said, hey, this is private property, you need to leave, we showed up the very next day or maybe a few days later and continued to do the same work. We as a government, we ignored the request of a private property owner. And to me, that is just wrong. And Mr. Dietrich has put what I think is a very reasonable request that he would like us to do. He says, I would like the township in writing to acknowledge that it has no easement or trespass rights on the private drive section of Wood Thrush Lane, and that it will not re-enter the property without prior written request and approval of all residents and or their successors. So he's not saying no, he's saying let's agree ahead of time. Let me finish, Catherine.
Sure.
He says failure to notify and attain approval will be considered criminal trespass, subject to penalty by presiding law at the time of the occurrence. Approval is not guaranteed and may be subject to conditions including but not limited to providing COI, waiver of liability, work plan, pre and post road damage inspection, or compensation for private drain usage. Now, something else that I was really concerned about, I had been told by the township that we had permission from one of the residents, Mr. Grote, to actually enter onto the private drive and access it even through his property. I was even told Mr. Grote was pleased with the clearing of the work we did. Now I heard testimony tonight, and this was new testimony to me, that Mr. Dietrich has documentation, and Eric, I would like you to give me this documentation, where no such permission was ever given by the property owner. This is very concerning to me.
I certainly hear what you say, and it resonates with me, as did Mr. Dietrich's emails. And all I can say is we really need to have all the parties sit down face to face. I persist in believing there is a workable solution to this. But if all that happens is we receive angry emails and we can't get anybody to sit down with us, I don't know how we're going to resolve this.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, do we have the legal right to just abandon it? It seems improper and certainly not within the intent of the law.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure the law ever addressed abandoned cemeteries which are turned over to the townships, but nobody lets us in to maintain them. And I don't think the law addresses that. Yeah. But there has to be some way. We're all reasonable people, but it requires, I think, sitting down.
Yep.
face-to-face, working out with all the stakeholders, property owners, and see if there is a way through this. I persist in believing there is. I'm an optimist.
Yeah. If I'm and I agree with everything you said. I think there's wisdom in your counsel. But if I'm the property owner and someone's on my property and I said, get off my property, and they're very back there the next day doing the exact same thing without providing the COI, the proof of insurance, potentially damaging my property with no agreement to repair it. After I've told them to leave, I've exercised my constitutional rights to my private property, and they were ignored.
It sounds like a Strother Martin moment,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
I would not be likely to want to sit down and meet with those people until I got something in writing that they acknowledged my rights.
Well, Mr. Lane, your point is well taken. I read the emails correspondence that between Mr. Dietrich and Township, and that there was, I think the Township had been trying to sit down with the Mr. Dietrich and to meet with him. I think so far has been unsuccessful, and I think it is really important that we need to sit down and work this out, both Township and Mr. Dietrich.
Or we have to get a
Separate.
legal opinion that we can walk away from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
May I address
Sure.
the matter as well, please? I just kind of to frame the timing, I did receive an email from Mr. Dietrich on March 1st sharing his frustration and concern over the township services in accessing the Jeffress Cemetery. And from that point, I sought explanation from Mr. Frank, our Community Services Director, because I was not there. I was not involved in the exchange. I had no firsthand understanding of it. And I think herein lies why I've been actively and persistently inquiring of Mr. Dietrich to please meet with me, because I hear the explanation from the township's position where there was never any explicit demand to leave the property, but yet through your meeting with the property owner, you hear something differently. And therein lies, I believe, the issue of why I've been, again, trying to engage a meeting, not only with Mr. Dietrich, but I will try to now engage the rest of the property owners, because he said, she said, just doesn't resolve. It comes to no resolution. And so I really am pleading with the board to allow us to do that, because I really believe through dialogue we can come up with some resolution. And if the township improperly and was explicitly told to leave property and we didn't, you're right, I'm as angered about that as you are, Mr. Trustee Lang, but I'm not going to assume that that's what happened until I can speak with all of the parties collectively and hear, because you, as we all know, there is misunderstanding, miscommunication, inferences that are inferred or implied that may not be there, and I just believe that all of the parties together is the best solution. May I?
Sure.
And so I really endeavor to Mr. Dietrich to please, oblige my offer to sit down and meet with you and your neighbors and be able to discuss this more thoroughly and more.
If you read the emails, he's never said, no, let's not meet, it's just schedule hadn't allowed it up to this date.
That was the one time that he did respond to any request for a meeting, and after that, there's been no response for that.
I understand busy schedules.
Yeah, I do, and I think then what I would like to do is be able to have that dialogue, come back to the board with an explanation and a report, and then clearly be able to provide to you what your options are, because as you mentioned, our law director is reviewing this. We are mandatorily, we have to accept mandatorily acquired, whether it's an abandoned or if there's a private cemetery that no longer wants to maintain it and they want to grant it to the township. We are required to accept that. Your rights to not maintain them, I don't believe the statute provides for that, but that's a provision that our law director has to interpret and provide to me. But I believe understanding the scope of the exchange, if the township was at fault, we certainly will ensure that we take responsibility and are accountable for that fault. But until we can get together and talk, I can't truly ascertain or assess the exchange and the potential violations, if any, that had occurred. So I just, you don't need my permission to speak. I'm done, if that's what you're asking.
Oh, okay. I had one other thing that concerned me, and I realize we're hearing some of this kind of second and third hand.
That's right.
For example, a statement was made that one of our employees said that they were there because they were directed there by the Historical Society. Now, I'm amazed that any of our employees would take direction from the Historical Society and feel that they should go out and perform some service because they're directed by the Historical Society. I'd love to have that cleared up.
Well,
there must be a miscommunication.
It's my understanding there was no direction provided by the Historical Society. Again, that could have been
Somebody said that.
misinterpretation, misstatement, whatever.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's third or fourth hand.
It's my understanding that Mr. Frank explained to me that the Historical Society did request access to the property because they wanted to further their research on the markers and the deceased that are buried there. And in their endeavors of providing historical information on Township properties and or people, that was something that I believe Mr. Frank wanted to oblige.
May I say that among all three trustees here, let Ms. Boyko is our representative. We should let Ms. Boyko direct this matter properly, investigation, do it correctly, instead of each one of us go out to do investigation and talk to the person. This could be
If you're suggesting that we give direction to Mrs. Boyko to pursue this, I'd certainly agree.
do it that way, because it could be a serious matter later.
Yeah, I'd be happy to give direction to Ms. Boyko, but in doing that, I'm not going to relinquish my responsibility to the voters to continue to gather information on my own as well. But I think for Ms. Boyko to attempt to set a meeting with the agreed property owners makes a lot of sense, and gather all the information. One thing Ms. Boyko did say that I think was there was a lot of wisdom in, and I'm going to paraphrase, is let's not pass judgment until we gather all the information. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
But you, in essence, have already.
Ms. Boyko, you want to address citizens Steve Rynell's comment about zoning law? I think he wants to know more about.
I'm not sure. I think maybe perhaps that would be best for Mr. Yingling and Mr. Rynell to be able to have that discussion.
Mr. Rynell, will you get with Mr. Yingling, and he will explain to you what the zoning law is about?
And our citizens review committee.
Right.
Well, if I could offer something in this, actually there are two issues here on zoning, both from Mr. Rynell and from Mark Morris. The suggestion was made it would be good if we had a citizens review of this. That is in the process right now. A group of citizens which were named, which are all residents of this township, are currently reviewing our entire zoning code. And among other things, they'll be looking at the code that from which stems our complaint that was made with respect to liberty tax in there. And I can't go into that because we're in legal issues. With respect, however, to the liberty tax, you expressed the opinion that we had filed a lawsuit against them. No, they filed a lawsuit against us. So that's why we're currently in the court, not vice versa.
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to add, and it's everything I'd said publicly before, Mr. Rynell, you have my word. If I see someone in the neighborhood with a lemonade stand, I will not go up and stop them, because I think our actions in this case are not the proper actions. Not only is it not clear in our code, the violation that the liberty tax people have, it's actually an interpretation of our code, and I've expressed my opinion that I think the interpretation of the code in this example is wrong.
Okay.
Well, as far as that, the only interpretation I have, of course, is from what legal decisions have been made to date, and none of them have favored liberty tax. They've all sided with the township's position. But that's going forward. We probably shouldn't discuss it too much because we're still in litigation.
Well, we can discuss what happened. The only things that basically said is that the township did have a right to interpret the code this way. It never said our interpretation was right. It just said we had the right to make this interpretation and allow everything to move forward. So there's really nothing definitive that has said, hey, the township has won and the Liberty tax guy has lost. That's all yet to be determined.
Right, but the reason we're in court right now is because Liberty Tax sued us.
Yes, that's fair. Which, if I was a business owner, I would have done it too.
Well, kept their name in the paper.
That's right.
Okay, next box is trustee comment. Before we go into that, I want to say that, Mr. Lane, I want to apologize to you for my comments I made last meeting, that I misspoke about your involvement with, can I mention it, diners? And that something that I should discuss this in private, not in a public forum. And I apologize to you before or after the meeting, and I also apologize to you publicly tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Wong.
So I was wrong.
Thank you.
Okay. Trustee comment, Mr. Lane?
Yeah, I have a few. Although I wasn't happy with the presidential election, President Obama was reelected by a majority of the American people, and during his inauguration, Westchester was represented there. We had two of our citizens I would like to point out. One was Leroy Richard. His wife Audrey is here with us, and I'm very proud of Leroy. He was the winner of a Pledge to Serve contest. Leroy, who was a volunteer and a mentor of at-risk students for 20 years, was entered into a contest when he signed up to volunteer on National Day of Service, and as a result of his service to our community, he won a contest. And Audrey, you were with him, were you not? He and his wife got to witness the inauguration. Also up there was the Senior Vice Chancellor for Innovation and Development for the state of Ohio, Gary Cates, our former state senator. So Westchester was well represented at the inauguration by Mr. and Mrs. Richard, as well as by Gary Cates, our former senator.
And Miami University Marching Band.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. Yeah, Don Crane will be proud to let you know the Miami University Marching Band was up there and performing. And then there's one other thing that I want to share. A very sad thing for many people in Westchester. There's a young girl who was 20 years old. Her name was Alicia Lang, and she has been fighting cystic fibrosis her entire life. Ever since she was 5 years old, the road was stacked against her. Every time she had a breakthrough, the disease came back with a vengeance, and she's been through one hardship after another. Yet, just by reading her story in the paper and talking to people that know her, her spirit was unbeatable. Her love for life, her passion for people. It truly is a wonderful story. And after having a double lung transplant not too long ago, she passed away a few weeks ago, and that's just a tremendous loss for our community. Spirits like that don't come along very often, and just a big loss for our community.
No.
I don't have anything. Do
we have a...
Last Friday, I'll pass on that. We have an executive session. I will entertain a motion to adjourn the regular meeting and go into executive session with legal counsel for the purpose of considering and discussing personnel matters, review of benefits and duties of certain non-contract and contract employees, review of the retention, tenure, and evaluation of a public employee, acquisition, sales, or swap of real property, and current and pending litigation. The board will not return.
Also move.
I'll second.
Discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Wong?
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.